Welcome to Paranomaly. Fiction first, then the truth. If you have a story of your own, there's a place to share it at paranomalymedia.com. The website is in the episode description. Tonight's story is as follows. I stopped using my real name a long time ago. Not because I had to, because it made things easier. Cleaner. If someone asked, I could answer without thinking. The names changed, the handwriting changed, sometimes even the way I spoke changed, but the routine stayed the same. Arrive, check in, watch, then leave before anyone had time to remember me. The first hotel was like any other, nothing out of place, small lobby, dim lighting, a man behind the desk who didn't look up until I was already standing in front of him. I signed the card, used the name I had decided on earlier that day, and he handed me the key. He didn't ask questions. No one ever does if you pay in cash and tip well. I took the key and was about to turn away. That's when I saw him, not directly, even a reflection behind the desk. A man stepping through the front door. He paused just inside, long enough to look around, long enough to see me. Or I think he did. I didn't turn around. I didn't react. I just walked towards the stairs like I hadn't noticed anything at all. Room 407, end of the hall. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and I closed it behind me, and I waited. I always waited, just a few seconds, listening. There were no footsteps outside the door, there were no voices, nothing unusual. Still, I crossed the room, picked up the phone, and called the front desk. "Can I switch rooms?" My voice was steady. It always is. There's no reason for it not to be. The room's a bit untidy. A slight pause on the other end, a little bit of confusion, then agreement. They always agree. They brought up a new key. I moved quickly, quietly to another room, a different floor, a different number, same process. I didn't sleep much that night. I never do. Not until I understand the layout and the sounds and the people. And morning came without anything happening. No knocking, no voices, no reason to think I'd been followed. And that was the problem. There was no reason. Nothing he had done stood out. He walked into a hotel. That's it. People do that all the time. I told myself that as I left, as I checked out under the same name I had used the night before. As I walked past the desk without looking back, it was nothing, just a man, just a coincidence. And the next city felt the same. Different streets, different hotel, but the same process. Cash, name, key. This time I watched the door. I didn't even pretend not to. I stood off to the side after checking in, adjusted my bag, looked like I was putting my wallet away. Really, I was waiting. Counting the seconds, until the door opened and someone stepped inside. Not the same clothes, not the same face, but it felt familiar, too familiar. I didn't stay long enough to confirm it. I went upstairs, closed the door, and I locked it. And I listened, and nothing, again. I stood there for a long time, trying to decide if I was remembering something that wasn't there or noticing something I shouldn't ignore. I crossed the room, picked up the phone. "Can I switch rooms?" The voice on the other end hesitated. Another untidy room, another key, another door closing behind me. I moved through cities like that, quiet and unnoticed, or at least that's what I told myself. But it kept happening. Different hotels, different lobbies, different people, and always someone entering shortly after I did. Not rushing, not looking for me, just there. Sometimes I would catch it in reflections, glass or polished surfaces, a shape that lingered a second too long. Sometimes I wouldn't see anything at all, just feel it, that shift, that sense that I wasn't alone in the way that I thought I was. I started changing more than just rooms. My clothes and my hair and the way I carried myself. Slower or faster, or more confident, or maybe distracted. It didn't matter. If someone was watching, they would see something different each time. If no one was watching, then none of it mattered anyway. That thought stayed with me. If no one's watching, why does it feel like someone is? I stopped asking that question after a while. There's no answer that helps. You either believe it or you don't. And once you start believing it, everything fits. Too well. The last place was quieter than the others. Not a city, not really. Just a stretch of road that led away from everything. I didn't check into a hotel. There was nothing there to check into. That was the point. There was no desk and no staff and no one to see me arrive. No one to remember me. I walked out into the valley just before it got dark. It was cold air and it was still. There was no wind. No sound beyond my own breath. I carried what I needed with me, Not much. The ground was uneven, loose rock shifting underfoot, the kind of place people avoid, or come to for reasons they don't care to explain. I stopped when I was far enough in. I turned back out of habit. Nothing behind me. No one. Just the path I had taken to get there. It was empty. I knelt down. I set the case on the ground. I opened it. One piece at a time, carefully and deliberate. There are things you don't carry with you forever, things that don't belong anywhere. Names and papers and small pieces of lives that shouldn't exist. The fire caught quickly. Light spread across the ground, flickered against the rocks, and pushed the dark back just enough to see. I fed it slowly, watched everything change. Edges curling and ink disappearing, evidence becoming nothing. I stayed there, watching it burn, making sure. That's when I felt it again. Not a sound or a movement, just that shift. The same one I'd felt in every hotel, in every room, every place I'd tried to leave behind. I didn't turn right away. If someone was there, they weren't hiding. The firelight moved across the ground and caught on something beyond it. A shape, standing just outside the reach of the light, still and waiting. I stood slowly. I didn't speak. I didn't step back, and the shape didn't move. He just stayed there, watching. The fire shifted again, flared for a second, and the light reached just far enough to show his face. What you just heard is based on a real, unsolved case known as the Isdal Woman. On November 29, 1970, a man and his 2 daughters were hiking in a remote valley at Isdalen near Bergen, Norway. The area is known as Isdalen, often referred to as Death Valley because of its history of accidents and suicides. That morning, they came across the burned body of a woman lying amongst the rocks. When police arrived, the scene immediately stood out. The woman's body was severely burned, especially the front. Her face was unrecognizable. Around her were personal items, but something was off. Every label had been removed. Clothing tags had been cut out. Identifying marks had been scratched away. Even the items that remained seemed deliberately stripped of anything that could trace back to a person. Near the body, investigators found an empty bottle of liqueur, plastic water bottles, burned paper, a purse, jewelry, and a matchbox. Beneath her body was a fur hat, later found to contain traces of gasoline. The positioning of the body raised questions immediately. She was lying on her back, arms drawn up, and her hands were clenched. It didn't look natural. 3 days later, the case became even stranger. Police located 2 suitcases at a nearby railway station that were linked to the woman. Inside, they found wigs, clothing, multiple currencies, cosmetics, and a number of personal items. Once again, all identifying information had been removed. There was also a notebook. At first, it appeared to be meaningless, just letters and numbers, but when investigators decoded it, they realized it was a travel log, a record of places she'd been, dates, and movements, and this allowed police to reconstruct part of her journey. And that's when the scope of the case expanded. The woman had traveled across Norway and Europe using multiple identities, at least 8 different names and different occupations, different birthplaces, and different addresses. All false. Despite the changes, there were patterns. She often listed herself as Belgian, she filled out forms in German or French, and the addresses she gave didn't exist. Hotel staff across multiple cities described her in similar ways: well-dressed, reserved, careful. She often stayed in her room, and she had a habit that stands out now. She would check into a hotel and then change rooms shortly after. She always paid in cash and avoided attention and moved frequently. Her last confirmed sighting was on November 23, 1970. She checked out of a hotel in Bergen, paid in cash, and requested a taxi. After that, her movements are unknown. 6 days later, her body was found in the valley, and the autopsy raised even more questions. She had died from a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning and barbiturate overdose. Investigators found that she had consumed between 50 and 70 sleeping pills, and there was soot in her lungs, which means she was alive while the fire burned. Her neck showed bruising, and despite this, the official ruling at the time was likely suicide. But that conclusion has never sat well with many who've looked into the case, because nothing else about it fits cleanly. Why remove every label from her belongings? Why travel under multiple false identities? Why carry wigs and change appearances? And why keep coded records of movement? And how do you end up in a remote valley, burned with no clear explanation of how she got there? There are witness accounts that complicate things even further. One report claims that she was seen in the area days before her death walking ahead of two men, as if she were being followed. Another account suggests a taxi driver picked her up and was later joined by a second man during the ride. And none of these leads were fully confirmed. Some were never properly followed up, and over time the case went cold. One of the most discussed theories is espionage. The case took place during the Cold War. At the time, Norway was involved in testing the Penguin missile system. Investigators later found that many of the woman's movements appeared to line up with locations tied to these military tests. There were also reports placing her near restricted or sensitive areas, enough to raise suspicion, but never enough to prove anything. In the decades since, new technology has added pieces to the puzzle. Isotope analysis of her teeth suggests she may have been born in or near southern Germany, possibly around Nuremberg, before moving to a French-speaking region as a child. DNA analysis has also provided limited clues, pointing to a broader European origin. But even with modern forensic tools, her identity remains unknown. No confirmed name, no background, no purpose, only patterns. And those patterns are what make this case so unsettling. A woman traveling across countries, under false names, changing rooms, avoiding attention, tracking her own movements in code, and possibly being seen followed by different men, possibly being watched, possibly watching something herself, and then suddenly ending up alone in a remote valley, burned, with no clear explanation. There are cases where the unknown feels distant and abstract, and this is not one of them. Everything feels deliberate and controlled, like someone was moving carefully through the world for a reason we still don't understand, and that's what makes it linger. Not just what happened to her, but what she may have been doing before anyone ever found her. Because if you look at it a certain way, this isn't just a story about an unidentified woman. It's a story about someone who went to great lengths to make sure they were a ghost, and for the most part, it worked.